Hello ladies and gentlemen, today we are looking at the KV-220, the last of the 4 vehicles given away after doing the Operation S.U.M.E.R challenges, and this one is a Tier 3 Russian heavyweight. It is a massive tank. Basically the KV-220 is if you took a KV-2 or a KV-1 even, elongated its chassis, made it a lot longer, put on a massive, basically a 5-sided turret, I can't remember the word for it, is it a pentagral or something like that, and stuck basically the T-34-85 gun on it, and stuck it at 5.3. It is a huge tank. Now generally with huge tanks, that's normally not a great thing. When we look at other huge tanks in the game, some of them they've had a bit of a resurgence. One of the ones which comes to mind, which always struggled, at least on its release, was the M6A1. And the M6A1, at least since I've been playing around with it, and since I've been facing it, the M6A1 has been doing a lot better. The new crew replenishment system helps a lot, since it has quite a lot of crew in it, and just because it's such a spacious tank, and most of it is engine, it's quite hard for people to generally hit the It's quite harder for people to hit the areas which actually have crew in them. Also, maybe people just have a bit of fatigue because they just haven't faced them in such a long time, they don't really know where to shoot them. Same thing with the LVTA-1. Now, this may just be a noob thing since it's such a low BR, but it also seems like it's quite a hard tank to kill for a lot of players. The same can go with the M4A3E2, but I think that's much more down to the fact that they were never really seen for a very long time, and now people are having to deal with them. They're wondering where to shoot them. So when we look at the KV-220, first of all, I just want to take into account the fact in the battle I'm showing you, I'm sorry about all of the stuff on the screen and the arrow, but the reason I'm showing you it is because my KV got hit on the turret by an artillery shell. There you go, there's the artillery shell, and it bounced. It bounced off the top of the turret, and you could clearly see the artillery shell, and I think I zoom in on it later on if I've got it on player view. But you can see an indentation. You can see the KV-220 get hit in the top of the turret, and it didn't do anything, it just bounced off. Now I don't think, I'm not sure if this is a bug or not, but this thing, even though it's very large, it is kind of impervious to artillery. You may get tracks knocked off, you may get your engine hit, but when it comes to the turret, as you just saw, it bounces artillery shots, and I really don't know why that is, because they should really go through it. So the KV-220 sits at 5.3. Around 5.3 and 5.0 is very contested for the Russians. You have the KV-85, which is probably the worst out of the bunch, but still pretty good. The T-34-85 D5T, the T-34-85, the Su-152, the IS-1 if you want to go up to 5.7, and the wonderful Su-85M. Basically, the Su-85, which kind of gets people into trouble because it's actually got more armor than its other counterparts. So people shoot it and think they're going to pen it straight away, and then they realize that it's the M version and go, oh shit, I can't go through there. So around this BR, it's very contested for the Russians, especially when you're looking at other tanks. I'm not including premiums. The Su-100Y, I would say the KV-220 is a lot better than it, just because of its turret. Obviously the gun on the Su-100Y is superior, but its reload is too long, and obviously it's not a turret, so it can't turn very well. I'm not going to talk about the KV-206, I think it's a cancer on the game, and I will get into it at some point. It's the new M26E1 in my books, if you ever saw that video. So around 5.3, as I said, it's basically competing with the T-34-85. So the question we have to ask is it as good as the best tank that the Russians have at 5.3? If we first of all just compare it to other heavies, so at 5.3 the Russians in realistic have a KV-85. Is the KV-220 better than the KV-85? In my honest opinion, yes, it is much better. The KV-85 has a wonderful turret on it. The turret can bounce many a shot. The issue is, because people have faced so many of them, they know where to shoot it now. You shoot it in that big flat part under the turret, and if you actually pen it, which most people do, you will kill all of the crew. And because there's only 4 of them, it's quite easy to do in one shot, especially if you're facing a Tiger. You've got to remember the big the big issue with the Russians at this tier is the Tiger. The big issue for most nations at this tier is the T-34-85 and the Tiger. So that's why Americans and British struggle around this tier, even though they have the Comet and the Hellcat, which they should try and use a bit differently, but still, the allied nations, apart from Russia, struggle. They really do struggle. So, the KV-85 is absolutely abysmal against the Tiger. Is the KV-220 any better? The KV-220 is slightly better. Being at the same BR, it does have better armor. Will this help that much against the Tiger? Maybe not, but sometimes you will bounce. You do have more armor on the front, and the front of the KV series can be very dodgy. Sometimes it will just soak shots, sometimes nothing will happen. When we look at the KV-220, generally it has 100mm of armor all around it. On all of its turrets, which may take some people by surprise, it's at least 100mm, and on its upper glacis and lower glacis, you're once again looking at least 100mm of effective thickness. If you have something that pens over 100, where you want to aim for is the gun mantlet. The gun mantlet is the weak spot. Is it much of a weak spot if you're not in a Tiger? No, not really. It still has 90mm of armor, so at range you're going to really struggle against this thing. Maybe you track it and run away, kind of like sometimes what you have to do with the Churchill if you don't have the pen to kill the damn thing. But the only real weak spot for it is the gun mantlet. If you look at its hull, if you look at its turret all the way around, it is not a weak spot. I mean, the fact is, a lot of people are going to come up on this tank and shoot it in the side of the turret to try and take out as many crew members as possible. And it's going to bounce or it's going to be absorbed, and they're going to find it very, very odd. But this thing has 6 crew. So one of the big advantages of having 6 crew and 4 in the turret is the same advantage that you can have with 5 crew, as long as 3 are in the turret and not 4. Because if you take out the turret, you still have 2 people left over. That does not trigger your crew replenishment, and also it means that your machine gunner can move to gunner, so you can still be operational even if your turret gets hit hard. You can make it so there is no ammo in your turret, which is a good idea, so there's only ammo below where your driver is, which is once again very, very useful. The reason the KV-220 is so elongated is because of the massive engine in it. It's very, very similar to the M6A1, where it's got a big booty on it. The transmission is right at the back, and the engine is just in front of that. So if you're trying to immobilize this tank, it is very hard to do if you're trying to do it from the front. If you're trying to do it from the side, it is still quite difficult to do, because the armor is 100mm, as I said, all the way around. Generally, let's just look at the Tiger. The Tiger is a great example of this. So the Tiger H1, which sits at 5.7, so just above this one, its armor is quite good on the front. Once again, 100mm, very similar to the KV-220, but its turret armor is significantly better, or at least most of it. So the gun mantlet is about the same. But when we go to the side of the Tiger, it decreases to 82. On the back, you're once again at 82. On the turret, 82. So you can see you can attack it from the sides and you can have a significant advantage. Against the KV-220, you can't, because with the KV-220, it's the same armor all around, which is why it's good at side scraping. The issue is it is absolutely massive, so side scraping may not be on your arsenal when it comes down to it. So we'll get into it. It's decent against the Tiger. It's got a good enough gun to be useful against the Tiger. The 85mm F30 is exactly the same as the T-34-85 gun. I can't really seem to see any differences. Let's just check the ammo just to make sure. BR36A for the KV-220, and for the T-34-85, BR36A, which is the standard shell, and then you get the BR365K. So you do get an upgraded shell for the T-34-85. If you're using the APCR on the T-34-85, you're generally doing something wrong, since you already have enough penetration with the APHE to actually do something. The only real difference, it seems, between the two shells is that one uses the A92 or the AIX2, which I'm guessing does a bit more oomph. But overall, the KV-220 gun, even though it may have a different name, it has the same penetration, it has the same muzzle velocity, I believe. I'll just have to check that because it's generally shell specific. 792 on the KV-220, and on the T-34-85 it is 792. So the shell muzzle velocity is exactly the same. One of the things that is slightly different, and this may just be down to my cruise, so it probably is because it's so close. The reloading rate on my KV-220 right now is 9, and the T-34-85 is 9.1. So that may just be down to crew, to be honest, since it's so close. Where the T-34-85 reigns supreme, though, over the KV-220, is the fact that of its speed. The KV-220 is a massive tank. It is a very, very heavy tank, looking at 62.7 tons, nearly twice the weight of a T-34-85, which is quite amazing, actually. And the fact is, the T-34-85 has much better acceleration. It can get around the battlefield better, and around this BR in Arcade and Realistic, you want to be able to go quick at the start of a battle to try and get into a position where you can take on those Tigers at close range. The KV-220 struggles more with doing this against Tigers and stuff because it can't get to those positions first. It's also a hell of a lot bigger target, so they can see where you're coming. Also, engine noise plays a small part, but I think it's negligible, depending on the sound settings that people have. So the gun's the same, the reload's the same, the T-34-85 is faster, the KV-220 has slightly better armor. But we all know, with the T-34-85, how it loves to bounce stuff all day long. And it's just something weird about it. It will just bounce things when it feels like it. It has a very dodgy upper glacis, where most times if you actually look at it on the if you look at it in the game, you know, it says 70, 74, 80 when it comes to effective thickness, so you should be able to go through that, but sometimes it just randomly bounces. Just because it feels like it. With the Tiger, you should always aim for the upper glacis. If you are worried about the T-34-85 shooting first, you shoot it where the gunner is, because he's still got 90mm of effective thickness, so you should still be able to go through that. So the KV-220 wins on the armor front. Where it comes interesting, and where I think the T-34-85 has always had the advantage when it comes to realistic, is once again the maneuverability. But not just how quick it is or how easy it is to traverse, but the fact is it can turn its turrets so damn quickly. 20 degrees per second in realistic, whereas the KV-220 sits at 9.5. This means that the T-34-85 can position so much faster than something like a KV-220, and it makes a huge difference. The KV-220 sits with all of the other Russian tanks which have pretty terrible gun depression, which is a real shame for them. They would really dominate if they had any. Properly dominate. But, yeah, I think that's where the big difference comes in between these two tanks. I think the T-34-85 is just more maneuverable, and when you are facing Tigers, which can easily pen over 100mm, if we just look on its stats card, the Tiger H1, you're looking at armor penetration 162 at best, 138 at worst at 1,000 meters. So yeah, it's going to go through you. Same with the Dicker, same with the Nashorn, it's the same gun as the Tiger. Same with the Panther. The Panther has even more penetration than the Tiger. They're going to go through you. Let's look to the Americans. The Americans at 5.3 have the HVSS Sherman. It's got a bit less penetration, but it can still go through you, just slightly though. So, facing Americans, there may actually be a difference in facing the KV-220 over the T-34-85, because obviously it's much easier to go through a T-34-85. Against the British, once again, you have that wonderful Comet and Avenger. The Avenger shouldn't really struggle to go through you. It has up to 171, and even at 2,000 meters, you know, 120, 108, it still should go through you there. Whereas the Comet has the wonderful Sabo shell, so yes, it will go through you. That's why, for me personally, when I look at tanks, I look at what their gun can do compared to the armor that they're facing, because in a lot of times the armor is just negligible. It just doesn't matter what it is, because most guns of that tier will go through you. And with the KV-220, yes, it's slightly against some tanks can make a difference, but most of the time it really isn't going to make a difference, especially when they know where to shoot you. Now, this is something I talked before about as well, the idea that the M6A1 is having a resurgence because people don't know where to shoot it. Well, the KV-220 right now, because not many people have it, they're still looking it up because it's quite a cool tank, so maybe they'll know where to shoot it. But in half a year's time, in a year's time, when you pull it out in a few battles, they'll have no idea where to shoot the damn thing. And I think that's where it will gain its advantage over the T-34-85, because everybody faces T-34-85s all day, so they know where to shoot them. But overall, the T-34-85 is the better tank at 5.3. Is the KV-220 better than the KV-85? Yes, definitely. It's massively better than the KV-85. Just because it has the better armor and, in my opinion, the better gun. Even though the guns are very, very similar in what they do, I just like the KV-220 gun better. It's very much an opinion thing, because all of the guns, the D5T gun, the T-34-85 gun, the KV-220 gun, they're all basically the same when it comes down to it. Is it a good challenge tank? Now, somebody came up with something that I kind of agree with, actually. They left a comment saying people would want a reward where it would be worth doing 36 out of 40 challenges for. So that was their rationale for the Tiger Cat. And I understand that. I really understand that, and I do agree. For most people, that is good, right? They want something that shows them that doing all the challenges were worth it for them. For me personally, I would like something a bit more unique. Even though the KV-220 is different to a lot of things, it's just taking one tank, elongating it, and sticking a slightly different turret. It's very, very similar. It's much better than the Tiger Cat in that extent, but it would have been nice to have just some crazy idea. Maybe that's what they'll do next time. But anyway, I hope you have a lovely day, and I will see you next time.